Let's talk about Static Qigong. It is time for us to begin studying Static Qigong. If we had started with Static Qigong from the very beginning, many of you would have been confused. But by now, you have already practiced for quite a long time. You have practiced Dynamic Qigong, including Shanggong, and the three-step disease elimination Qigong. At least these two methods have been practiced. As for Static Qigong, it is not that we have never tried it, nor is it that we have never studied it. Most of us have at least begun to understand it. So now we will spend some time talking about Static Qigong. Why? Because I still wanted to ask Professor Liu Tianjun, before he retired from the Liu Tianjun University of Chinese Medicine, to give everyone one more class on Static Qigong. Because listening to him explain Static Qigong would be much better than listening to me explain it. It is his specialty. This is his unique expertise. It is his specialty, so I wanted to introduce him to everyone. This time when I went back to Beijing, I met with him several times. I also personally attended several of his classes. I discussed it with him, and he agreed to teach everyone about Static Qigong. Of course, his first words were, "Then they have to practice." Every teacher who teaches Qigong thinks the same. You cannot just learn without practicing, so I said to him, "First tell me how much time it will take." He said 2 sessions. About 2 hours each. There are not that many techniques to learn in Static Qigong. Things like breathing or movements, there are none. Once you understand it, you understand it. And then you practice on your own. You have to practice until you develop your own experience. So his initial plan was to give 2 lectures. 2 sessions, about 2 hours each. I think that is quite good. We do not need to spend too much time or money learning something. But once you have entered the practice, how far you go really depends entirely on yourself. Okay, now let us talk about Static Qigong. Let us repeat some of what we discussed before. We have talked about the classification of Qigong. I do not know how many of you still remember our methods of classifying Qigong. In fact, through more than 5,000 years of Qigong history, there have been many ways of classifying Qigong. But the classification we commonly encounter and the one that is easier for everyone to accept and understand is one we have actually discussed before. We have talked about 4 classification methods and still remembers these 4 methods. I only remember Dynamic Qigong and Static Qigong. That is one method of classification. Based on the form of the practice. From the perspective of form, there is the classification into Dynamic Qigong and Static Qigong. There is another classification method, based on the pathway taken by Qi. We have microcosmic practices, and we also have macrocosmic practices. Shanggong starts by cultivating the Qi within oneself. So we classify Shanggong as a microcosmic practice. We activate our internal Qi, open and regulate our meridians, clear our stagnation, and then allow Qi to begin doing its work. Finally, we open the body to communicate with the universe. This is what we call a microcosmic practice. Its Qi pathway goes from inside to outside. As for disease elimination Qigong, it is a macrocosmic practice. It works from the outside inward. It opens the body right from the beginning. So whether it is the pores, the nostrils, the lungs, the skin and body hair, or the acupuncture points, or opening the heart, or opening the primordial spirit, it also opens both the soul and the physical body. And allow Qi itself to choose its pathway, its course of movement, and how it will treat the illness. In other words, we completely entrust ourselves to Qi and let Qi treat the illness. So with a macrocosmic practice, first of all, the sensations produced during practice. Those sensations of stimulation, such as numbness, soreness, fullness, wind-like sensations, blockage, are not as obvious as in a microcosmic practice, because a microcosmic practice follows the meridians. Everyone has meridians. And as soon as Qi moves, you can feel it. So you may feel numbness here, fullness there, pain here, heat there. But with a macrocosmic practice, there are not so many changes in sensations. So many people tend to compare these 2 methods. They say, when I practice Shanggong, I can feel everything. But when I practice disease elimination Qigong, I do not feel nearly as much. We have talked about this before. It is because their Qi pathways are different. Therefore, we say that because these 2 methods use different Qi pathways, it is best not to practice them together. We have discussed this as well. That is the second classification method, classification according to the Qi pathway. The third classification method is one we often use, the so-called 3-level classification. Beginner level, intermediate level, and advanced level practices. This is something you should use in the future when teaching Qigong. no matter which country you are in, and no matter how much a patient knows about Qigong. Some people may say, I have practiced Tai Chi. Others may say they have practiced yoga. Some may say they have practiced Baduan Jin, or five animal play, or Hexiang Hung. They may have practiced many different methods. Then a patient may ask, why should I practice your method? So when we give a Qigong presentation and encourage patients to practice, we should explain it to everyone. According to this 3-level classification, a Qigong method may be an advanced method, an intermediate method, or a beginner-level method. Advanced methods are practiced by people at the level of masters. When they reach a certain state, they may develop extraordinary abilities. They may communicate with heaven and hear messages from heaven. They may have the ability to see through things. They may have the so-called inner eye ability. They may have enhanced hearing abilities. So this is a particular level of practice. Through their own abilities, they can help patients adjust illnesses, emit qi, and treat disease. We call these advanced practices. Such people are generally rare, and this is something that cannot simply be sought at will. It is not that if I want to develop an ability, I will necessarily develop it. Some people may carry a particular mission, and therefore possess such abilities. For example, they may open the inner eye, see information, communicate with information, and even converse with information. We call this an advanced practice. We rarely talk about this, and usually avoid the subject. We seldom discuss it. Intermediate level practices are the methods we most commonly encounter in daily life. For example, practicing for longevity or for health maintenance. So there are many methods we can choose from. For example, 5 animal play, Baduan Jin, Yi Jin Jing, and similar methods. In China, after the Falun Gong issue, after 14 Qigong practices were banned, people felt as though all Qigong practices had suddenly been banned. But we could not do without Qigong. Qigong is part of Chinese culture. So the Ministry of Health removed the Qigong department. Then it was placed under the National Sports Administration. In the past, we had a combined Health and Sports Administration. Later, the Ministry of Health and the Sports Administration were separated. The Ministry of Health became the Ministry of Health, and the Sports Administration became the Sports Administration. The National Sports Administration was not originally called the Sports Ministry. It was called the General Administration of Sport of China. The General Administration of Sport is also a ministerial level institution. It established a Qigong division. At that time, in order to let everyone know that Qigong had not been completely suppressed, it introduced 4 health-promoting Qigong methods. They were called Health and Fitness Qigong Methods. Teacher Li. Sorry, teacher. The teacher accidentally locked your microphone. They included Yi Jin Jing and 5 animal play. There were 4 health-promoting Qigong methods in total. But we need to understand that from the very beginning, the state described these as health and fitness Qigong. In other words, they belong to fitness and health maintenance practices, rather than disease treatment. They were not medical Qigong methods, so these methods are classified as intermediate level practices. How do we determine that they belong to the intermediate level? That they are for fitness and health maintenance? Again, we have to look at the historical period. For example, Baduan Jin. In the past, Baduan Jin was used hundreds of years ago. More than 500 years ago. And more than 600 years ago when it first emerged. At that time, it actually had very good therapeutic effects. Because there were no other better methods for treating illness. And at that time, the types of illnesses people suffered from, the composition of people's diets, and the causes of disease were all different from today. So at that time, Baduan Jin, as a medical practice, actually had quite good therapeutic effects. That is why it continued to spread until today. Eventually, there developed Southern Baduan Jin and Northern Baduan Jin, standing Baduan Jin, lying Baduan Jin, and even 12 seated Baduan brocade. So Baduan Jin developed throughout China, in both the north and the south. In this way, but these practices today have gradually become less suited to the illnesses of modern people. For example, how many people today become dietary ill because excess and irregular eating? In the past, there were not so many emotion-related illnesses or diet-related diseases. So Baduan Jin is now regarded as a health maintenance practice. Therefore, we cannot say that Baduan Jin was historically always a health maintenance and had no therapeutic effects. We cannot say that. It is simply that history has developed, disease patterns have changed, and the causes of disease have changed. So what about intermediate level practices? In Europe, or anywhere else in the world, the practices people commonly hear about and commonly learn, first of all, are pleasant to perform, and they feel comfortable. People often say, after practicing, I feel comfortable all over. If it makes you feel comfortable, that is enough. It does not necessarily have to treat disease. We do not necessarily require it to treat illness. We simply seek a feeling of comfort. That is also fine. These practices may be for beauty, health maintenance, or longevity. We call them intermediate level practices. Then what are beginner level practices? They are the methods we most often talk about today. That is, practices whose purpose is to treat disease. This is the classification we commonly use when discussing the 3 levels of Qigong. When you give a presentation, you should also explain why they are called beginner-level practices. Beginner level does not mean low level. It is because, first, they are simple. And second, they are easy to popularize. Because they are methods for treating disease. You cannot say, if you learn particularly slowly, then you can just remain ill. For example, with Guolin Qigong, some patients master it quickly, while others master it slowly. You cannot say that a patient who learns slowly should simply switch to another practice. You cannot just say, forget it, try another method. There may not be another Qigong method that can treat cancer. So we say that beginner-level methods must meet certain conditions. First, the method itself must be simple. Second, it must be easy to popularize. Third, its indications must be broad, so that it is suitable for many people. If you have a headache, it can treat it. If your foot hurts, it can treat it. If your blood pressure is high, you can practice it. If your blood pressure is low, you can also practice it. If your blood sugar is high or low, or your blood lipids are high or low, you can practice it. So we say that a method must have broad indications, and it must be easy to promote, easy to learn and practice, and time-saving. This is what modern people need most. Saving time. These are what we call beginner-level practices. Beginner-level practices are also our medical Qigong practices. So in the future, when you are mobilizing people to practice, or when you are giving presentations, you should explain to everyone what kind of method can be classified as a beginner-level practice, or what we call a medical Qigong practice. We have also discussed this before. Before Falun Gong appeared in China, our medical Qigong methods had to be reported up from among the people. After being reported, they had to provide 3,000 to 4,000 case records. These medical records also had to be notarized. In other words, the Western medical diagnosis had to be an official notary stamp to prove whether the case record was simply written by the patient, or whether it was a genuine medical record, confirmed by a doctor through normal diagnostic and examination procedures. Then there also had to be successful treatment experience. For example, for this patient with this illness, after practicing this method, what was the treatment outcome? This included Guolin Qigong. We have conducted statistics on it, and it was statistically evaluated many times in history. The last statistical study of Guolin Qigong stopped in 2018. Previously, we conducted follow-up statistics every 15 years. We followed cancer patients for 15 years. After 15 years, the first statistical study found that were still alive among the surviving patients and among the patients who died. We also recorded whether they died from cancer or from heart disease. All of this was statistically recorded. After these statistics were completed, they were submitted to the Ministry of Health for evaluation. And only then could the method be officially classified. In other words, what we call beginner-level Qigong practices are practices whose purpose is to treat disease. This is the third method of classifying Qigong practices according to beginner, intermediate, and advanced levels. There is another classification. That is, a classification commonly used among the people. According to Buddhism, Taoism, Buddhist, and Confucianism, and Confucian practices, there are Buddhist practices, Taoist practices, and Confucian practices. There are not many Confucian Qigong practices, but Buddhism and Taoism. According to the historical development of their religions, their research into Qigong, and their promotion of Qigong, also provide another way of classifying practices. Of course, there are also martial arts practices and performance-oriented practices. For example, light body skills belong to performance-oriented practices. There are also health and fitness practices. So within Qigong, there are many different classifications. For example, besides Buddhist, Taoist, and Confucian practices, there are martial arts practices and among them are also medical Qigong practices. To summarize, the classification methods we most commonly use are 4 types. Today, our main focus is the classification into Dynamic Qigong and Static Qigong. We have already seen many Dynamic Qigong practices. In the past, when you were in China, you certainly saw plenty of Dynamic Qigong as well. The characteristic of Dynamic Qigong that it uses regular, patterned movements. Whether it is Hexiang Hung 5-animal play, Baduan Jin, or Tai Chi, each has its own regular, patterned movements. So we call it Dynamic Qigong. Of course, Static Qigong also has its own forms of practice. Within Static Qigong there is standing practice, which we call standing post practice. There is also seated practice and lying practice. There are seated postures and lying postures, half-reclining postures, and standing postures. Even just within standing post practice, there are many different methods. There is Tuoshan Gong. There is Sun Yuan Gong. And there are many other methods. One of the methods we commonly use today is Daidong Gong. That is, you close your eyes, relax both hands, and stand quietly with the whole body relaxed. Using this relaxed and still standing posture, this is one of the simplest Seated practice can also be static Qigong. Today, however, we are not going to go into all Dynamic Qigong and Static Qigong. Dynamic Qigong involves movement. Static Qigong emphasizes stillness. But stillness does not simply mean sitting there without moving. True stillness involves the regulation of the body, mind, and breath. When the body becomes still, the mind gradually becomes quiet. When the mind becomes quiet, the breath naturally becomes deeper and more subtle. Eventually, these three aspects can become unified. This is what we mean by entering stillness. There are several basic forms of Static Qigong. You can practice standing, sitting, or lying down. Standing practice is often called standing meditation or standing Qigong. It is closely related to Zhanhong or standing meditation. Sitting practice is what most people associate with meditation. And lying practice can also be used when the body is weak or fatigued. Each posture has its own characteristics. But the purpose is not simply to maintain a particular posture. The real purpose is to enter a state of stillness. For people who have practiced Dynamic Qigong for many years, this transition becomes especially important. Why? Because Dynamic Qigong mainly works through movement. Movement stimulates Qi, opens the channels, and helps the body restore balance. But after a certain level, movement itself is no longer enough. You have to learn how to become still. This is an important turning point in Qigong practice. Dynamic practice and static practice are not two aspects of the same path. Movement can lead you into stillness, and stillness can give birth to movement. This is the principle expressed in the traditional saying, extreme movement gives rise to stillness. Extreme stillness gives rise to movement. We should not think that movement is the final goal. Movement is a way of preparing the body. It helps us release tension, open the meridians, and awaken the movement of Qi. Then, when the body has reached a certain level of balance, we can gradually enter stillness. This is why I say that Dynamic Qigong eventually leads towards Static Qigong. Now let us talk about the three main postures of Static Qigong. The first is standing. The second is sitting. The third is lying down. Standing practice has a major advantage. The body remains upright and naturally alert. It is therefore easier to maintain a clear state of awareness. But standing for a long time can also be physically demanding. Sitting is different. Once the body is properly supported, it becomes easier to relax deeply. This is why sitting practice is often used for entering deeper states of stillness. When you sit, you should not deliberately force yourself to become still. The more you try to force stillness, the more active the mind may become. Instead, you should gradually relax. Let the body settle. Let the breath settle. And allow the mind to become quiet by itself. This is the meaning of letting nature take
Chinese
its course. In Chinese Qigong, we often use the words Som, Jing, and relaxation, stillness, and naturalness. These three ideas are fundamental to Static Qigong. If you cannot relax, it is difficult to become still. If you cannot become still, it is difficult to enter a deeper Qigong state. And if you are constantly forcing the process, you are no longer practicing naturally. This is why Static Qigong requires a different attitude from Dynamic Qigong. We often have clear movements and clear methods. In Static Qigong, the technique becomes increasingly simple. Eventually, there may be almost nothing to do. This is where many people become confused. If I am not doing anything, then what exactly am I practicing? The answer is that you are practicing your own internal state. You are learning how to regulate your body, your mind, and your ki. At the beginning, you may still need some guidance. You may need to adjust your posture, relax your muscles, and settle your breathing. But gradually, these adjustments become necessary. The body begins to regulate itself. The breath begins to regulate itself. And the mind begins to settle naturally. This is when Static Qigong begins to show its deeper value. Now, there is another important distinction. Static Qigong is not simply relaxation. Relaxation is only the beginning. Nor is it simply sleep. Sleep and stillness may look similar from the outside, but internally they are very different states. In ordinary sleep, conscious awareness is greatly reduced. In a deeper Qigong state, the body may become extremely quiet, while awareness remains present. This is one of the characteristics of advanced Static Qigong. The body becomes quiet. The mind becomes quiet. But awareness does not disappear. Instead, awareness becomes clearer and more subtle. This is why Static Qigong is not simply about sitting for a long time. Someone may sit for 2 hours without entering stillness. Another person may enter a deep state in only a few minutes. The amount of time is therefore not the most important measure. The quality of the state is more important. This is also why Qigong cannot be judged only by how many hours you practice. Of course, practice time matters. But what matters more is whether your body and mind are actually changing. The body's energy consumption can gradually decrease. The nervous system becomes quieter. The breath becomes slower and more subtle. The body enters a state that is closer to deep rest. This creates favorable conditions for recovery and self-regulation. From the perspective of traditional Chinese medicine, this is also related to the restoration of yin and yang. When yang is not constantly being consumed by excessive activity, the body has more opportunity to restore itself. This is one reason why static Qigong can have an important therapeutic role. It is not simply about treating a symptom. It may help the body return toward a more balanced internal state. This is the difference between merely treating a disease. So when we talk about static Qigong, we should not reduce it to meditation or relaxation. It is a systematic method of regulating the body, mind, and qi. And at higher levels, it becomes a way of transforming the practitioner's entire state of being. This is why I believe that people who have practiced Dynamic Qigong for a long time should eventually begin to explore Static Qigong. It is not because Dynamic Qigong is insufficient. It is because the two practices complement each other. Dynamic Qigong opens and activates. Static Qigong settles and consolidates. One moves, the other becomes still. And ultimately, movement and stillness are not separate. They are two expressions of the same Dynamic Qigong. Is commonly used in our medical Qigong methods, so you can see that our medical Qigong methods all involve movements. Sometimes a method includes breathing, while some methods do not even involve breathing. Why is that? Like Shanggong. Because it is easy to learn and easy to practice for modern human beings. The simplest thing is for you to tell me what I should do and how I should do it. The most difficult thing for us, as modern human beings, is to do nothing at all. If you ask someone to close their eyes and do absolutely nothing, they will feel that this is an enormous difficulty. The easiest thing for us is to let me do something. So we say Dynamic Qigong belongs to the category of deliberate action. That is, I have to do something. As long as you are doing something, you cannot enter an advanced state or advanced practice realm. So you remain in the beginner level state of practice within beginner level Qigong. What is it best suited for? It is mainly suited to practicing Qigong for the purpose of treating illness. I have a neurological headache. I have had diarrhea recently. I have fatigue, insomnia, or tinnitus. So we practice Qigong to treat illness. Therefore, Dynamic Qigong is very commonly used in medical Qigong. Second, health and fitness practices. There are also many longevity practices. Baduan Jin, 5 animal play, and Tai Chi are examples. Yoga is also included. All of these involve movement, so they are easy to promote, easy to learn and master, easy for people to like, and easy for people to accept. Because you can see what you are doing. As long as my eyes can see it, I can simply imitate the movements, and I know what I am supposed to do. I know that I have done something. But if you ask me to close my eyes and do absolutely nothing, I will feel that I have done nothing. Does this really work? Immediately, a doubt will arise in the person's mind. There will be a lack of trust. So Dynamic Qigong is relatively common in clinical practice. And it is also one of the medical Qigong methods that is relatively easy to popularize and promote. But because it is a practice involving deliberate action, it cannot enter an advanced state of practice. Just think about it. What do we mean by an advanced practice state or realm? An advanced state of practice, first of all, means that the physical body is no longer there. When the physical body is no longer there, your sensory perceptions are no longer there either. There is no longer any feeling of where it hurts, where it is numb, or where there is suffering. Those sensations disappear. And if we want to enter an advanced state and realm of practice, we must gradually move from having thoughts to ending thought. There is no more thinking. Thought has completely stopped. So emotions disappear as well. Therefore, it is a process of moving from deliberate action into non-action. In other words, from Dynamic Qigong into Static Qigong. So while we remain in the state of deliberate action, we can never enter an advanced state of practice. Because you cannot make your thinking stop. As long as you are still breathing, as long as you are still counting, or observing whether your movements are correct, as long as you are enjoying the comfortable feeling you get from practicing, that sense of well-being, you are still thinking. You are still doing something in the practice. You are still practicing with intention. Therefore, practices involving deliberate action always remain within the beginner level. They do not belong to the intermediate or advanced levels. But we must enter the state of an advanced practice. Otherwise, as you continue practicing, you will encounter more and more questions. One day, you will no longer need to ask me about these questions. You will ask yourself, or simply ask heaven. Today, I saw that some people asked questions such as how they could hear what comes from heaven, how they could receive words from heaven, or receive messages from heaven. You do not need to ask me. You can listen for yourself. Right? A few days ago someone told me that they were going to Austria. For a week-long retreat. Would it be at a temple? Would they have to observe silence? Not speak at all? And sit in meditation at the temple? I thought, how exhausting that would be. You would even spend money to fly to Austria. And then spend more money to go to a temple. And still have to remain silent there. Observing silence. What is all that effort for? At home, you can simply close your eyes. And you are already together with heaven. If you enter this state of practice, heaven is right beside us. We may call it heaven, or we may call it the divine. It is right beside us. So why go to all that trouble? But some people like to pursue the form itself. Of course, some people may prefer to use such an opportunity to help themselves become quiet. That is another matter. I do not object to your spending money to go there. I am only saying that there is no Buddha in that temple. The Buddha is not going to be in the temple. The Buddha is in your heart. So wherever you go, you carry the Buddha with you. Now let us return to Dynamic Qigong. Because it uses movements. It is a practice of deliberate action. Therefore, it cannot raise us beyond a certain level. After you practice it to a certain point, you will feel that you can no longer progress. You may have practiced for 1, 2, or 3 years. Some people have practiced for 3 years, such as the 3-step disease elimination may already have practiced it for more than 4 years. So after practicing to a certain level, you may feel that you cannot improve any further. What you were meant to gain, you have already gained. What could be improved has already improved. But what cannot be improved remains where it is. And you will increasingly have more desires. For example, you will want to know more. You will want to know what your mission in this world is. You will want to know how much karma you have. You will want to know what happened in your previous life. You will want to know what your next life will be like. You will want to know why, in this life, you have to encounter so many difficulties. You will want to know why you became ill at this particular time. So while people are alive, they all want to understand the meaning of their lives. At this point, your questions will become more and more numerous. But you cannot progress further. And to truly understand life, you can only rely on Static Qigong to advance yourself. So naturally, you will gradually move from the most basic medical Dynamic Qigong practice toward a state belonging to an advanced practice. Then what is the advantage of Dynamic Qigong? Its therapeutic effects come quickly. You practice, and the illness may disappear. Sometimes, as I have said, your sleep may improve on the very day you begin practicing for a few weeks. Pain that has lasted for years may disappear. I have patients who have suffered from neuralgic headaches for more than 30 years. The first time they practiced, the pain was there. And then the neuralgic pain disappeared. So we say that the advantage of Dynamic Qigong is that its therapeutic effects come quickly. But it can also be prone to recurrence. Second, in addition to being prone to recurrence. For example, at the beginning the effects of practice may be very good. And sleep may improve as well. But recently, because you became upset about something, the insomnia may come back. Then when you practice again, you may find that the effect is not as good as it was before. You see, this is the first issue. Symptoms may recur. Why does this happen? Because our state of mind and our primordial spirit have not yet been reorganized, and soul have not yet been completely restored. We have not yet learned, in the way we live our lives, to let go completely. So at this point you may find that even some very small things in daily life can cause all your symptoms to return. These are some of the limitations of practicing medical Qigong. We can call them its weaknesses. The first is that symptoms can easily recur. The second is that practicing Qigong cannot guarantee that in the future. You will achieve immortality. Immortality. Never dying forever. Every person's life has its own fixed course and duration. But practicing Qigong also cannot guarantee that we will never become ill. For example, I recently had a German patient. She told me that she had always practiced Shanggong. She practiced very diligently and practiced very well. Recently, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. And that creates a problem. She began to have doubts. She would wonder, why, if I have been practicing Shanggong, do I still have breast cancer? In my work throughout my life, I have encountered this many times. Patients really do practice Qigong, and practice very diligently, but we can never guarantee that they will not develop cancer. Because cancer has its own causes, for example, oxygen levels, immune function, including hereditary or family-related immune function, and genetic factors affecting immune function. There may also be increased emotional toxicity, such as carrying hatred, carrying jealousy, or having a desire for revenge. And there are also environmental factors. For example, in your living environment, there may be certain radioactive substances around you. Or there may be factors related to the composition of your diet. Many of these are not things that practicing Shanggong alone can solve. So even though we practice Shanggong, we still cannot guarantee that we will not develop cancer. This is one limitation of medical Qigong. It is not primarily aimed at treating the spirit. It does also treat the spirit to some extent, but it regulates a person's emotional state. It can make you more peaceful, so that you do not react so extremely when things happen. And it can improve your emotional state. It can also help repair some of the wounds of the soul. But if we want our primordial spirit to reappear and regain its authority, to take back that authority, that is relatively difficult to accomplish through medical Qigong. As we have said, our conscious mind develops only after birth. Our conscious mind is the false self. So when we practice Dynamic Qigong, when we practice medical Qigong, what we are repeatedly cultivating is that false self. Our primordial spirit is the true self. To cultivate the primordial spirit, we can only reach the true self through Static Qigong. That is why the levels are different. Now let us return to Static Qigong. When we practice Static Qigong, the first thing is that it increases our Gongli very quickly. What do we mean by Gongli? We know that Gong Li includes the body's healing power, the body's ability to recover from illness by itself, and our innate human potential. These are all part of Gong Li. It also includes the potential functions of the human body. I often say, what do we mean by a function? A function is a potential ability of the human body. Every person has such potential. It is simply that you have not developed it. If you never use it, you will not know how to use abilities such as the inner eye. If you strengthen the Niwan area, you may be able to use the inner eye to perceive things. So, if we want to increase our Gong Li, we have to raise ourselves to a higher level. And raise our Gong Jing. We need to enter a higher Gong Jing. And within that state, when you can merge with the universe, and humanity, with heaven, with the divine, one with and with the Buddha, you have reached this Gong Jing. Only Static Qigong can achieve this. In other words, the ultimate purpose of our practice is to reach oneness of heaven and humanity. Oneness of heaven and humanity means that you are the universe, and the universe is you. You have already merged into the universe. This is the transition from the finite into an infinite state. So this is a very high state. When we communicate with the universe, we can increase our Gong Li and enable ourselves to reach oneness of heaven and humanity. It allows the primordial spirit to re-emerge and allows our Gong Jing to enter the highest state of attainment. Only Static Qigong can achieve this. That does not mean Static Qigong has no therapeutic effect. Of course it does. If you enter this Gong Jing and then use this Gong Li to treat illness, the speed of the therapeutic effect can be almost instantaneous. When we communicate with the universe, we can increase our Gong Li and allow the primordial spirit to re-emerge. Then our Gong Jing can enter the highest state of attainment. Only Static Qigong can achieve this. That does not mean that practicing Static Qigong has no therapeutic effect. Of course it does. So if you enter this Gong Jing and then use this Gong Li to treat illness, the speed of the therapeutic effect can be almost instantaneous. It can happen within minutes. Indeed, the problem may be resolved in a very short moment. For example, in the past we often saw many Qigong masters standing on a stage, emitting qi to treat people's illnesses. With a stomp of the foot and a shout, a tumor would disappear. That was the work of their Gongli. It was not our own Gongli. We were relying on their Gongli to make the tumor disappear. For example, I once had a patient. She was a nurse. She had a very large thyroid nodule. Her practice was not producing much improvement. It just kept growing and growing. She kept saying to me, "Perhaps I should have it removed. Perhaps I should have it removed." I always told her, "Wait a little longer. Wait a little longer." Then one day, a Qigong master came to our practice site. The Qigong master said, "I am going to emit Qi to attack the tumor." He looked at me. Because I was also there practicing. He smiled at me. And then said, "Who wants me to emit Qi to treat a tumor? Breast tumors and thyroid tumors are both fine, as long as they can be felt by touch. If it can be felt, you can prove whether the treatment works." Her thyroid tumor was visible even from a distance, let alone being palpable. She smiled at me, and I told her, "Go up." She went up onto the stage. There were more than 10 people standing in a row. The Qigong master began working on the tumors. He suddenly stamped his foot with a loud bang, gave a loud shout, and when she came back down, the thyroid tumor was truly gone. This is Gongli. Of course, what we are talking about here is the Gongli of those practitioners. My student came down afterward and told me, "Where did the tumor go?" I said, "I don't know. Maybe it went outside the door." Of course, we were joking. But things like this cannot be explained by the simplest modern theories we have. It is Gongli. When we enter this level of attainment, the Gongli can be this powerful. Treating an illness can become a matter of moments. Let me give you another example. I knew a woman in her 40s. She was diagnosed with advanced cancer. I cannot remember exactly which advanced cancer it was. I think it was lung cancer with metastasis. And it had already spread extensively. At that time she had no other option. This is what she told me herself. I only met her after she had recovered. She said that at the time, the doctor told her, "You have at most 3 months to live." Treatment is no longer having any effect. We know that in medicine, lung cancer is often described as an incurable cancer. With many other cancers, if they are found early, there is still hope for treatment. But with lung cancer, she was told there was no hope. So she believed that death was the only outcome. At that point, she completely let go. She realized that in her life, her children, her work, money, her husband, none of these things mattered anymore. What mattered was whether her life would continue or end. At that time she did not know any other form of Qigong. She only knew how to sit in meditation. She had learned Static Qigong. So she said to her husband, "I am going to go into an unused room." An empty apartment they had. The place was not large. But she said, "I will stay inside." The place was not large. Every day, make sure you bring me food and water. Just leave them outside the door. Do not call me. Do not knock on the door. Do not disturb me. After 3 months, if I come out alive, you can celebrate for me. If I die, carry me out. That was the plan she made for herself. Those were the 3 months. Because the doctor had told her she had only 3 months to live. She sat in meditation. After 3 months, she came out alive. The tumor had disappeared. She told me herself that during those 3 months, she became completely still. Day and night, there was only one thing she did. Except for eating, drinking, and sleeping. She practiced Qigong. She accomplished it in those 3 months. So you might ask, was it a miracle? Actually, it was not a miracle. She had practiced Qigong to that level of attainment. That was why her Gongli emerged. Let me give you another example. Again, this is the example of Professor Liu Tianjun. I have told you about him before. In 2017, Professor Liu Tianjun was diagnosed. And this particular cancer was a type of bone marrow cancer that the World Health Organization had newly identified in 2012. It was highly malignant. After he was diagnosed, he became extremely thin in a very short time, almost nothing but skin and bones. When I saw him, I said to him, "Close your eyes and jump into the river." I told him, "You cannot just lie in bed." He could no longer even get up from the bed to stand and shake my hand. He would collapse back onto the bed. He was already this weak. Then I said to him, "Practice Qigong." He asked, "What kind?" I said, "Guolin Qigong." I said, "Guolin Qigong." He had just finished his research in 2018. 2018. Yes, wait a moment. In 2017 he developed the illness. I went back to see him in 2019. The tumor was gone. So he was diagnosed in 2017 and began practicing in 2018. He started with Guolin Qigong. After 3 months, he could no longer practice it because the air pollution in Beijing was extremely severe. So he had no choice. He switched to Static Qigong, and he was an expert. His research itself focused on static Qigong. More specifically, he was deeply interested in the Buddhist practices of Chan and esoteric Qigong. So he found a temple. He did not go there because he was looking for the Buddha. He wanted a place where he could become completely quiet. And only a temple could give him that kind of quiet. So he rented a room in the temple. There was food and water there. It was almost like staying in a hotel. But hotels have people coming and going. And they are relatively noisy and chaotic. And hotels are expensive. The temple, on the other hand, was quiet and located outside the city. So he stayed there. Every day, apart from eating and sleeping, he simply sat in meditation. The first time I saw him again was 10 months later. He was still very thin and dark in complexion. Extremely dark and extremely thin. He told me that he could not yet say he was completely recovered. By then, how many years had passed? 25 years. So, I told everyone, if Static Qigong can enter this Gong Jing, and if you can reach this level of Gong Li, the therapeutic effect can be very rapid. In other words, what matters is whether you can enter it. So Static Qigong has its own characteristics. But during this period of time, in this particular moment, there is a state without time or space. So it is a state that language cannot adequately describe. At the moment you enter eternity, there is no time. There is no space. When you enter this state, you cannot know how you entered it. You cannot know how long you have been inside it. Only when you come out can you look at the clock and discover that perhaps 5 hours have passed, or perhaps only 5 minutes, or perhaps only 10 minutes. It may be like Damo, who remained there for 9 years before awakening. I once met an old Buddhist monk. He was receiving visitors who had come up the mountain to see him. He was roasting potatoes. He was roasting potatoes while chatting with everyone. As he continued roasting them, he entered a Gong Jing. Once he entered it, the visitors realized that he had begun sitting in meditation. Gradually, all the visitors slipped away and left. When he finally came back to ordinary awareness, he told me himself that the potato had become nothing but charcoal. He had no idea how many days had passed. Then he simply returned. So when we enter this Gong Jing, you can never know when you entered, how you entered, or whether you are actually inside it. You can never know. It is like being awake. You can never know exactly how you entered sleep. But when you come out of this Gong Jing, you will know that you have been inside it. Because only after experiencing it can you know what this Gong Jing is actually like. So it may sound somewhat mysterious, but you have to experience it once. Only after experiencing it can you know what it can bring you. It can bring you many things you never expected, and make you live with greater clarity and understanding. So this is the kind of Gong Jing it is. If you live with greater clarity and understanding, when you encounter situations and have to deal with them, you will respond completely differently from before. Now you have to persuade yourself, I must not lose my temper. I should be tolerant and gentle. I should let go. I should not be driven by desire. After entering that state, when you return, you no longer have to force yourself to do anything. You naturally know what to do. So I hope everyone can understand Static Qigong. It is different from Dynamic Qigong. It is a state. It is a Gong Jing. It can increase our Gongli. Another point about Static Qigong is that it does not have completely precise boundaries, such as beginner, intermediate, and advanced levels. So you cannot really say whether you are practicing beginner level Static Qigong or advanced level Static Qigong. Once you enter, you have entered. And when you enter this advanced level of practice, it does not depend on whether you have practiced for 10 years or only 10 days. It does not depend on whether you practice 10 minutes a day or 10 hours. It does not depend on how long you have been practicing, nor does it depend on how long your practice history is, or how much you understand the method. It depends entirely on the state. It depends on your innate understanding. It also depends on your conscious or discriminating mind, on how complex the contents of that mind are. For some people, this mind itself interferes with entering the Gong Jing. It is their conscious or discriminating mind that interferes, because their minds are simply too cluttered. It also depends on our conscious or discriminating mind, on how complex the contents of that mind are. For some people, this complexity interferes with entering the Gong Jing. Their conscious or discriminating mind is what interferes. They think too much. For example, the woman with cancer I mentioned. This woman, she did not think about anything. In that state, it was either life or death. So she let everything go. When she let go of absolutely everything, she entered the state of emptiness very quickly. So you cannot say that she was smarter than other people. That is why we say Static Qigong does not have obvious boundaries between beginner, intermediate, and advanced levels. What it needs is a state. What it needs is our capacity for understanding, and the degree to which we simplify the conscious or discriminating mind. So it has nothing to do with time, with how long you practice, or with how long your practice history is. It is related to our capacity for understanding. So when we practice Static Qigong, there is no fixed number of sessions per day, or a fixed duration for each session. There is no such requirement. You can practice whenever you want, when the conditions are right, when the environment is right, and when you have the desire to practice. Then you can practice. So some people tell me that before going to bed at night, they sit in meditation. And when they open their eyes, it is already daylight. How did it pass so quickly? I didn't fall asleep. If I had fallen asleep, I would have dreamed. If I had fallen asleep, I would have fallen over. But I remained sitting the whole time. Yet when they wake up, it is already broad daylight. Others tell me that while practicing, time feels extremely long. But then they suddenly discover that only 10 minutes have passed. So Static Qigong has its own characteristics. Its classification is also different from the way we classify Dynamic Qigong. Its classification is also different when we talk about its therapeutic effects. It is not that Static Qigong has no therapeutic effect, as we have said. From the medical perspective, another point is its therapeutic effect. It is not that Static Qigong has no therapeutic effect. As we have said, its therapeutic is not primarily to treat symptoms. Its main purpose is to treat the underlying causes of illness. For example, it can repair the soul more quickly. It can allow the primordial spirit to re-emerge. It can help the primordial spirit return to its proper place more quickly. It can help us reach the state of oneness of heaven and humanity more quickly. Emptiness means that nothing remains. The physical body is no longer experienced, and naturally, physical illness is no longer experienced either. Our conscious or discriminating mind is also gone. So the senses are no longer functioning in the usual way. It is the ordinary conscious mind that interprets sensory experience, heat, cold, darkness, color, and all the information received through the senses. Our sensory world depends on this discriminating consciousness. The senses are interpreted through the ordinary mind. When that mind also becomes quiet, the usual sensory experience disappears, and thought naturally becomes quiet as well. The process from active thinking to complete cessation of thought is part of entering this state of emptiness. When the physical body is no longer experienced, its illnesses are no longer experienced either. When the ordinary mind becomes quiet, its emotional wounds, pain, and memories can also fall away. Disturbing emotions can naturally disappear. This brings us to the final stage, the state of emptiness. If the ordinary mind is gone, and the physical body is no longer experienced, what remains is the primordial spirit. And when did the primordial spirit arise? It existed before our physical birth. It is originally connected with heaven. When only the primordial spirit remains, that is what I call the true self. When the true self is united with heaven, we reach the state of oneness of heaven and humanity. So what does this mean therapeutically? If the experience of the physical body completely falls away, then the experience of physical illness can also fall away. This is why I previously talked about visualization. In visualization-based practice, the practitioner may use the mind to imagine the illness disappearing. In other words, one visualizes the disease as being gone. This is the principle behind that method. The patient may visualize the tumor disappearing. The idea is to work with the mind in this way. But Static Qigong takes this process to another level. So Static Qigong can also have therapeutic effects. If you want to understand its therapeutic power, it is not that Static Qigong lacks a medical effect. In fact, its effects can be much more profound. Dynamic Qigong has its own characteristics. It works through movement. So why is Static Qigong important? Because everyone who practices Dynamic Qigong will eventually reach a certain point where they need to enter Static Qigong. Because when movement reaches its extreme, stillness arises. If you continue moving and moving, eventually the movement reaches a point where stillness naturally emerges. And when stillness begins to arise, something changes. After practicing Dynamic Qigong, when you then turn to Static Qigong, you may find that entering stillness becomes remarkably deep. You may reach a much higher Qigong state. Dynamic Qigong helps prepare us for entering stillness. And when stillness reaches its extreme, movement arises again. When you enter deep stillness, spontaneous movement may appear. When the body and mind become completely still, who begins to move? Qi begins to move. When Qi starts to move within this stillness, it may produce very gentle, rhythmic, spontaneous movements. In other words, after practicing Dynamic Qigong, we should eventually learn Static Qigong. This is not only about increasing our Qigong attainment, It is also a necessary stage in the process of movement giving rise to stillness. The human body needs balance. We cannot keep moving without stillness, nor can we remain still without movement. Static practice therefore increases our therapeutic effectiveness, while allowing the transition between movement and stillness. It is a process of balance. There is another benefit to combining Dynamic and Static Qigong. After Dynamic Qigong, Static Qigong can help us address the underlying causes of illness more deeply. For example, after practicing Shanggong, a chronic neuralgic headache may improve very quickly. But then an unexpected emotional event occurs, and the old headache may return. Through Static Qigong, we can work more deeply on the underlying cause. This is especially relevant to disorders related to the emotions, and to illnesses associated with deep psychological or spiritual wounds. Static Qigong can help address these deeper layers. There is another important reason to practice Static Qigong. For every Qigong teacher, Static Qigong is an essential part of practice. Only through Static Qigong can you deepen your own Qigong attainment. It can help you better understand and treat your own problems, and better help others in their healing. You can understand yourself more deeply, and understand your own state more clearly. Only then can you also understand your patients more deeply. Sometimes you may wonder why a practitioner seems to know something about a patient without being told. For example, they may look at a patient's name and somehow recognize aspects of the person's character. They may also sense something about what the person has experienced. You might ask, how can you tell that from a name? There is no fixed formula. But with deeper Static Qigong practice, such perception may arise naturally. There is nothing mysterious about it from the practitioner's perspective. It is simply an expression of Qigong attainment. As your attainment deepens, your diagnostic and therapeutic perception can become more refined. You understand yourself better, and you understand your patients better. Sometimes when you look at a patient, you may immediately recognize where the central problem lies. It can become that direct. Diagnosis and treatment may therefore become much more efficient, and the therapeutic process can become much simpler. Dynamic Qigong is a practice of Yue intentional action. Static Qigong is a practice of Wui non-action. In other words, Yue means that I deliberately do something. In Static Qigong, I do not deliberately do anything. Not only are there no physical movements, there is no deliberate movement of the body. Even the thinking process gradually stops. So what do we actually do in Static Qigong? What you need to do is very simple. Withdraw from sensory stimulation, and allow discursive thinking to cease. When the ordinary experience of the body
usual
falls
sensory
away,
experience naturally
without
falls
the
away.
ordinary physical reference
How would you know
points,
whether something is hot or cold?
the senses become quiet. Without ordinary visual perception, you no longer experience coolness in the usual way, nor do you perceive colors in the usual way. So the senses gradually become quiet, and thinking also comes to rest. This is what we begin to practice when we first enter Static Qigong. Static Qigong is therefore a practice of wui, or non-action. The less you deliberately do, the less you need to think, the less you need to move, the less you interfere with the process. Then you can begin to enter a different state. Wui, in which nothing is forced and yet nothing is impossible. What does wui, yet nothing is left undone mean? It means reaching a state in which you no longer have to force anything. Yet, when action is needed, it can arise naturally. This is the deeper meaning of wui. There is no longer a rigid sense of "I cannot do this." The potential for action becomes much greater. Traditional Qigong describes this as being able to enter communion with the Buddha. It may also involve insight into previous lives, or a deeper understanding of this life. Why can such experiences arise? Because in that state, ordinary time and space no longer define experience. When you are standing within ordinary earthly consciousness, you experience yourself as being on earth. There is yesterday, tomorrow, and a sequence of time. But from a wider cosmic perspective, ordinary spatial distance and temporal boundaries may no longer dominate awareness. This is the state described as wui, yet nothing is left undone. The potential becomes open. So we can say that practices based on deliberate action remain largely at the beginner level. Practices of wui can help us enter more advanced levels. Ultimately, the purpose of Qigong practice is to reach wui, yet nothing is left undone. And this leads toward oneness of heaven and humanity. In that state, one is said to know the will of heaven, to understand life and death, and to understand past and future. These ideas are not meant to be sensational. You can explore the practice for yourself. I hope you will come to appreciate Static Qigong. So how can we understand Static Qigong more clearly? Let us look at it from another perspective. We know that Qigong has 3 major techniques. We call them the 3 regulations, or Santiao. These are the 3 fundamental techniques of Qigong. When we practice Shenggong, or when we practice Cubing Gong, we often talk about these 3 regulations. They are regulating the body, regulating the mind, and regulating the breath. Breath, of course, means breathing. There are many different breathing methods in Qigong. Various forms of abdominal breathing, embryonic breathing, turtle breathing, reverse abdominal breathing, and many other methods. Even certain wind breathing methods are included. These are all techniques. They can be deliberately practiced. The second technique is regulating the body. That is, regulating posture and movement. The body can be guided through many different movements. This is especially common in Dynamic Qigong and in Medical Qigong. Regulating the breath and regulating the body are 2 major practical techniques. The third technique is regulating the mind, or more precisely, regulating Shen. There are several methods for regulating Shen. For example, visualization and the practice of Yi Shu, directing the intention. You may place your intention on an acupoint, such as the Dantian, the soles of the feet, or Bai Hui at the crown of the head. This is the method of Yi Shu. We can also use visualization. For example, visualizing yourself practicing beneath the sun, beneath the moon, or beside the sea. The appropriate imagery may depend on whether there is excess heat or an excess of cold. So visualization can also be used. We can use the mind to guide the movement of qi. These are all techniques for regulating the mind, or regulating Shen. They are practical methods that can be used in training. Whether we use a breathing method, a physical movement, or the mind itself, we may guide the movement of qi. Visualize a particular part of the body, or simply bring our attention to a particular area. We may use Yi Shu, placing the intention there. All three are practical techniques. So, in essence, Qigong has three major techniques: regulating the body, regulating the mind and Shen, and regulating the breath. All three can be consciously practiced. But if you take each technique and use it only as a mechanical exercise, then it remains merely a technique. For example, if I only practice breathing, then I am simply practicing a breathing method. If I only practice physical movements, then it is simply exercise or gymnastics. Exactly. So these three techniques can be learned, practiced, and applied. That is why we call them the three techniques. We often emphasize them when teaching medical Qigong. These are the three major techniques. But to truly understand Qigong, we need to understand the three regulations. We call them Santiao, regulating the mind, body, and breath. But to reach an advanced Qigong state, the three regulations must become one. So when you later listen to Professor Liu Tianjun teach, you will hear him emphasize this again and again. True practice continues until the three regulations become one. In other words, this is the transition from Wui toward the state in which nothing is left undone. It is the transition into an advanced Qigong state, into an advanced level of attainment, and ultimately toward oneness of heaven and humanity. Only then can we say that the three regulations have truly become one. What does it mean for the three regulations to become one? It means that nothing is deliberately being done, yet everything is still present. Breathing is present. Intention is present. The physical body is present. Everything is there. And yet, in another sense, nothing is being deliberately maintained. Body, breath, and mind are completely unified. Within a single state. When you enter this state. When the three regulations become one. You cannot necessarily know the moment you enter it. But after you come out, you will know that you have been there, for example, after emerging from the state. You may suddenly realize that a very long time has passed, without you consciously breathing with the lungs. At that point, you may experience what traditional Qigong calls body breathing. The body is experienced as being completely united with the universe. So ordinary breathing may no longer seem to require the usual activity of the lungs. Only after emerging. Do you know that you entered the state? If you have never experienced it, there is no way to fully describe it to you. But I hope that each of you will experience it at least once. Even one genuine experience can remain with you for the rest of your life. Even if the experience lasts only a few minutes. Even for just a brief moment, it can have a lasting impact on your life. This is what we mean by the three regulations becoming one. It is a state, a Qigong state of attainment. It is a movement from the finite toward the infinite, from the momentary toward the eternal. It is a state of primordial undifferentiation, a state of emptiness. But it is not dead or lifeless. Nor is it simply motionless. This is why the integration of the three regulations is one of the fundamental goals of Qigong practice. And only Static Qigong can take us there. When the three regulations become completely integrated, you have entered this state. This is what we mean when we say that Qigong has three major techniques. And the three regulations. But we rarely emphasize that the three regulations must become one. Now we understand why. Static Qigong allows the three regulations to become one. We have also often spoken about three prerequisites for Qigong practice: Song, Jing, and Ziran. Relaxation, stillness. We know that relaxation and stillness and naturalness are the three prerequisites. Without relaxation, Qi cannot move freely. Without stillness, Qi also cannot move freely. Whether we speak of relaxation, stillness, or naturalness, the purpose is to allow the Qigong process to reach its highest potential and to help us fulfill the purpose of practice as naturally as possible. So, within Song, Jing, and Ziran, we do not need to say much about relaxation, and naturalness can also be simplified. Let us focus on stillness. In the early stages of practice, when we begin Qigong, what kind of stillness are we talking about? It is quietness, relaxation and stillness, and mental clarity. Many people assume that in Qigong, as soon as they become quiet, they have reached the best possible state. But that is not the highest state. It is simply a necessary stage. It is the preparation. And its prerequisite is still song, jing, and zuran. So in preparatory practice, we relax and enter stillness. We all understand this. At the beginner level. Especially in medical Qigong, it is enough to cultivate relaxation and stillness. Simple quietness is enough. Clear stillness is enough. Dynamic Qigong can also bring us to this level. But when we enter an advanced Qigong state, only Static Qigong can take us into a deeper, purer state of profound stillness and advanced Static Qigong attainment. This state may last only a few seconds or several hours, or even several days. In some traditions, practitioners are said to remain in such states for example, years. Is traditionally said to have faced the wall for 9 years. The tradition describes him as remaining in deep meditation for that Buddhist period. Practice. Practitioners may enter and emerge from deep meditative states for hours or days at a time. There are also traditions of bigu, for example, or abstention from ordinary food. Practitioners are said to enter extremely deep states. Some accounts even describe practitioners being inside a sealed glass enclosure and lowered beneath the sea. In that underwater environment, inside the sealed enclosure, there would naturally be no normal supply of air. Breathing would not be possible in the ordinary sense. Because it would be an oxygen-free environment. And yet, according to these traditional accounts, after some time, the enclosure was brought back up. The practitioner was reportedly still alive. These stories are part of traditional accounts of extraordinary cultivation. China also has ancient traditions of bigu practitioners. Some emperors were particularly interested in such practices. They were even more interested in legends of rejuvenation, hair becoming black again, or teeth growing back. So emperors sometimes brought practitioners of bigu into the palace. They might be asked to remain in seclusion there. For 3 months without ordinary food. The emperor would watch closely, often checking through a window or glass, to see whether the practitioner was still alive. The practitioner would do nothing outwardly, eating and drinking nothing, simply maintaining the bigu state and practicing Static Qigong. They would remain in that state. So when we practice Static Qigong under these conditions, the emphasis is on the state of stillness. Its duration is not determined simply by clock time, but during practice. If we truly enter the state of stillness, even a short period may have a therapeutic effect. In some cases, the effect may come very quickly. If you remain in this state for a longer time, you can regulate the Shen, regulate and even restore the Shi Shen. And you can also regulate the Yuan Shen. If you remain in this state even longer, you can allow the Yuan Shen to return to its rightful place and reach oneness of heaven and humanity. Naturally, certain so-called abilities may then appear. In other words, some of the body's original innate potential may be uncovered again. So, this is one of the purposes of our practice. A purpose that can be reached only through Static Qigong. In summary, Dynamic Qigong can bring us to tranquility, stillness, and clarity. But Static Qigong can take us into a fourth state, which we call the state of emptiness. The state of emptiness means that nothing remains. Now, as for Static Qigong, let us talk about its role in medical Qigong and its benefits. The study of Static Qigong in China is not something recent. Throughout history, there have been many periods when people studied Static Qigong. Modern medicine has also studied Static Qigong. Let me give you a brief introduction to some modern medical research on Static Qigong. For example, when we enter a state of stillness. When we enter this state of deep stillness, neurology specialists have used EEG recordings to test people entering stillness. When they enter deep stillness, researchers observe changes in the EEG that suggest the person has entered a state resembling deep sleep. In neurology, when we fall asleep, there is a brief period of about 3 minutes, and at most perhaps 5 minutes. After falling asleep, that is called the deep sleep period. The state of deep sleep. During this deep sleep state, ordinary people often say, once you fall asleep, you sleep so deeply that even if someone carried you away, you would not know. We often hear people say this. Or some people fall asleep, and the next morning someone tells them, there was thunder and heavy rain last night, and you did not know anything about it. Someone may even tell them that there was an explosion, or that the neighbor's house caught fire. And they say, how could I have slept so deeply? How did I not know? Yet they themselves may wonder, because they remember dreaming. They feel that they were also aware of something. But precisely during this period, they know nothing of what is happening around them. The reason is that after each of us falls asleep, it does not take very long, roughly an hour, before we enter a deep sleep state. This deep sleep state lasts for a very short time, only about 3 to 5 minutes. Yet during these 3 to 5 minutes, neurology specialists believe this is the best period for the body to repair itself, restore vitality, and recover its energy. In other words, these scientists would like the human body to extend the duration of deep sleep. But this is very difficult to achieve. Once we pass this deep sleep period, we begin to experience sounds again, lighter sleep, turning over and dreaming, and all kinds of sleep states that can affect our perceived quality of sleep. So, is this deep sleep state something new? No neurology specialists know about it. They have given this deep sleep state a physiological name, calling it the deep sleep period. Now, when we enter stillness, psychologists and neurology specialists have found that after entering stillness, people enter a state resembling deep sleep. And the longer it lasts, the better. Moreover, when we enter stillness and enter the state of static Qigong, we can remain there far longer than 3 to 5 minutes. So I often tell my patients, if you can enter stillness for 10 minutes, that can be a much deeper form of rest than ordinary sleep with turning and dreaming. It is an excellent state for the body to recover. The longer it lasts, the more time the body has to repair itself, and the more efficiently that repair may occur. So static Qigong can help us extend and improve the quality and duration of deep restorative sleep. Second, static Qigong can lower the body's basal metabolic rate. We know that the basal metabolism of our cells and the various organs in the body requires oxygen. Therefore, oxygen consumption is generally proportional to basal metabolism. So when is the body's basal metabolic rate at its lowest? In other words, when is oxygen consumption lowest? And when is the body's energy expenditure lowest? It is during sleep. Anyone who has worked in a hospital knows this. When we measure a patient's basal metabolic rate, the nurse will often come in early in the morning, around 5 o'clock, to the patient's bedside, and gently wake the patient. Then blood is drawn for testing. Why? Because at that time the patient is still in a deep sleep state, or in a half-asleep, half-awake state. The basal metabolism has not yet risen to the level of daytime activity, wakefulness, and active thinking. So at this time, Our basal metabolism is at its lowest level, its lowest state. And it is also the period when the body uses energy most economically. Now, when we practice static Qigong, researchers have found that compared with our normal basal metabolism, it can be another 16 to 20% lower than the lowest resting level. So, from the reduction in basal metabolism, we can see that static Qigong may support the body's repair functions and reduce the body's oxygen consumption. Naturally, this also means that the relative oxygen availability increases because oxygen consumption has decreased. The body's oxygen level can naturally increase. Therefore, for people with cancer and for Guolin Qigong teachers, it is commonly taught that cancer patients, in addition to Guolin Qigong, should also learn static Qigong. Because when you practice Guolin Qigong, you use a wind breathing method. You deliberately take in a large amount of oxygen. The aim is to increase oxygen availability through increased oxygen intake. But if the person practices static Qigong, they lower their basal metabolism. This relatively increases the available oxygen. By reducing oxygen consumption. So both approaches can increase oxygen availability. One increases oxygen entering the body, while the other reduces its consumption. Therefore, when we look at modern research, it provides evidence, according to the speaker, for the body's repair response to static Qigong. Increased oxygen availability, reduced basal metabolism, and improved immune function, cellular metabolism, and cellular repair can also reach a favorable physiological state. So we cannot say that static Qigong has no therapeutic effect. It does, and it may also help address the underlying causes of illnesses associated with emotional factors. Therefore, static Qigong also has an important role within medical Qigong. Now, looking at the 3 regulations of practice and the 3 prerequisites of relaxation, stillness, and naturalness. We have now seen all of them. So we understand that in practice, whether it is dynamic Qigong or static Qigong, we go through 4 stages. The first stage is the relaxation and stillness stage. The second stage is what we call the movement and sensation stage. Every Qigong practitioner needs to understand this. The first, relaxation and stillness stage, can also be achieved in dynamic Qigong. as long as you relax. Relax the whole body. And relax completely. We say that you must relax all the way through. Then you should not develop the kinds of problems that some practitioners ask about, such as tennis elbow. Some people also say that while practicing, they develop shoulder or back pain. If you develop shoulder or back pain from Qigong practice, I have to ask you, did you really relax completely? Or were you doing athletic exercise? Were you consuming oxygen through exertion? Were you still trying to increase your oxygen intake? The prerequisite for Qigong practice is relaxation, stillness, and naturalness. So the first stage is the relaxation and stillness stage. In Dynamic Qigong, we should reach it. And we should be able to do so. It is something we should deliberately pay attention to. Then the second stage is the movement and sensation stage. What do movement and sensation mean? In the second stage, you may feel tingling in the body, or swelling, itching, or perhaps something a little stronger, such as a slight skin eruption. You may also notice small red spots, or what may be experienced as a detoxification response. You may feel qi moving through the body, or a sensation of wind moving through the body, or warmth developing in the body. All of these are part of the movement and sensation stage. Once qi begins to work, the body may produce these kinds of responses. This stage can occur in Dynamic Qigong as well. Whether the whole body becomes hot, or the whole body becomes cold, or the whole body tingles, or there is pain, movement, or distension in different places, or the abdomen begins to make rumbling sounds, with belching here and passing gas there. These can all be manifestations of qi movement. This is the process we call the movement and sensation stage. We call it the movement and sensation stage. It can also occur in Dynamic Qigong. The third stage is also called the pleasure stage. This pleasure stage represents a deeper level. At this stage, a patient may suddenly feel extremely tall, extremely powerful. You may feel as if your head reaches the sky. Or you may suddenly experience an extraordinary sense of joy. This joy is not the happiness of obtaining something, nor is it the happiness of falling in love. It is an indescribable feeling of joy and delight. This kind of joy belongs to the pleasure stage. The sensations become particularly strong and clear. And they are difficult to put into words. When entering this stage, it is usually Static Qigong that takes you there. Now, in Static Qigong, when you enter this stage, you may see light. You may see your own internal organs. The so-called inner eye may also open. And the auditory ability may open as well. You may hear sounds from very far away. You may even hear what other people are thinking. This is sometimes called telepathy. So when you reach this third stage, the so-called pleasure stage, it is easy for us to become confused. And for some people to begin pursuing these experiences. They pursue these abilities. They pursue the opening of the inner eye, the opening of the inner ear, and other such abilities. But this is simply a pleasurable process. I always say that it is a process that tempts us. Because as long as you remain in a feeling, whether it is pleasure or sadness, you have not stopped thinking. As long as thought and sensory awareness remain, you can experience pleasure. Whether you are sad or joyful, the senses are still active. But the ultimate purpose of practice is for even the senses to disappear. When there are no senses, there is no ordinary conscious mind, and there are no emotional states. So entering this pleasure stage is also the stage where we are most likely to remain attached to the experience. We may become unable to continue practicing. This can interfere with our continuing to deepen our Qigong attainment. Later, when you practice Piaohua Gong with Professor Liu Tianjun, he will guide you into this stage. He will also remind you not to remain there. Do not become attached to the pleasure. So this stage is not a bad stage. It is simply telling you that you have entered and that you can continue moving forward. Then comes the final stage, the state of emptiness. In the state of emptiness, the physical body is gone. The ordinary conscious mind is gone, and only the primordial spirit remains, returning to its proper place. The true self remains. So at this point, the physical body is no longer experienced. There is no sensation. There are no emotions. There is no thought. So naturally, there is no pleasure and no sadness. You are no longer made happy by particular experiences. For example, if you see light, you do not become overwhelmingly excited. If you see the universe, or if you see your own internal organs, you do not become overwhelmingly excited. At that point, you are not taking pleasure in the fulfillment of a desire. Because as long as there is desire, as long as there is attachment, you cannot enter a higher stage. So when you enter the state of emptiness, nothing remains. It is a state described as infinite and eternal. So this is what Static Qigong is ultimately seeking. Now, after talking about all of this, you may feel that it sounds rather abstract. So I would like to introduce you to why I recommend learning Piaohua Gong with Professor Liu Tianjun. Why? Because Professor Liu has some unique advantages and opportunities. His wife's father was the secretary of Hao Puchu. We know that Hao Puchu was the chairman of the Buddhist Association of China. He passed away many years ago. His wife's father was Hao Puchu's secretary. Therefore, he had the exceptional opportunity to enter a Buddhist library and study Buddhist Chan and esoteric practices. He was also able to access books that were not publicly available or available for borrowing. He would sometimes stay inside for a week at a time, eating and sleeping there, to study these teachings. Why? Because he himself had once suffered from a serious illness. He and I once went together to Baidahe and the Great Northern Wilderness. But he had to return early because of illness. Because he had developed a condition that left his health chronically poor. He later studied Chinese medicine. Originally, he wanted to use it to treat his own illness. So he became particularly interested in Chinese medicine and Buddhist Chan and esoteric practices. Unexpectedly, after studying Chinese medicine, after graduation he was assigned to the medical and pharmaceutical department. He taught Chinese herbal medicine. But when Qigong began to flourish in China, in the early 1980s, a Qigong department was established at a University of Chinese Medicine. Because of his particular interest in Chan and esoteric practices, he was at that university and became the student of a teacher, a professor who taught Qigong. He studied Qigong with him and became his disciple. So when the Qigong department was established, it was organized as a Qigong department. He therefore entered this department and became a Qigong teacher. Later, because of the Falun Gong issue, China needed to engage with the United Nations and international human rights organizations and provide explanations about questions concerning Falun Gong, including whether practitioners were being mistreated, as well as its origins and historical background. He went to give a lecture or presentation on the subject. In this process, he was regarded as having made a contribution to the country. Therefore, at that time, he was China's one and only professor of Qigong. We know there were professors of Chinese herbal medicine and professors in acupuncture departments, but his professorship was specifically in Qigong. Later, a second one was appointed at Shanghai Medical College. So he was also a unique phenomenon in the history of China, but although in Chinese medicine, he taught what I called 5 animal play, because what his teacher taught him was not 5 animal play. I misspoke. It was 5 element palm. I was not particularly impressed by his 5 element palm. I felt its clinical results were not especially good. It is also called 5 element palm, but I was deeply impressed by his Static Qigong. All right. What he can do. What others cannot do is this. He can put into words the things that we ourselves cannot express. And explain them clearly. He can take something that you can only experience inwardly and give you a method for expressing it. I don't know whether I am making this clear enough. I often ask him to teach Static Qigong to my students. What amazes me is that he can take something intangible and invisible and make it tangible and visible to you. So when he teaches Static Qigong, he can help you get started very quickly. Then he also developed Piaohua Gong. I cannot simply say that Piaohua Gong was entirely invented by him. It was not something he just dreamed up on the spur of the moment. He took the ancient Chinese Static Qigong and Chan esoteric practices and divided them into 4 stages. Within these 4 stages, as I said, there are the 4 stages required in our practice. The relaxation and stillness stage, the movement and sensation stage, then after movement and sensation, the joy stage, and the emptiness stage. He uses this practice to teach these 4 stages, 1 stage at a time, so that they become tangible and understandable, and you can follow him step by step into them, reaching as quickly as possible the highest state of Static Qigong. So I am very willing to introduce him to you. He was able to cure his own illness through practice, which is already enough to show that his Qigong attainment is very good. Second, he has spent his whole life teaching Qigong methods. So he has his own distinctive way of teaching Static Qigong. If you study with him, and feel that 4 hours are not enough. You can discuss it with him and ask him to extend the course and explain more. Static Qigong is his specialty. So what I have just introduced to everyone is Piaohua Gong. Its original source is actually Buddhist practice. Because Liu Tianjun studied Buddhist Chan and esoteric traditions. Previously, we studied Huangdi and Yiqi. That is a Taoist practice. That practice was said to have been transmitted from heaven and passed to Li Junfeng. So, now you have encountered 2 static Qigong methods. You will notice that these 2 methods differ. Huangdi and Yiqi still belongs to the category of intentional practice. First you have to focus on the Danshan. Then you have to focus on the Niwan. You use intention to guide Qi from the Danshan to the Niwan. Then you look upward from the Niwan. You also let the physical body disappear. Throughout the whole process, you are doing something. Doing something. Thinking something. Actively carrying something out. These are all Yue, intentional practices. That is a characteristic of many Taoist methods. We have to do something. As long as you keep doing something, you cannot fully enter or reach that higher state. But then you simply enjoy its relaxation and tranquility, its freedom and simplicity. So when you reach the 2nd stage, he simplifies things further. He has you remove the clouds, leaving only the sky and you. Then you become even freer. There is no dependence. There is no fear. You are completely free. You can fly. You can be anywhere in the sky and go anywhere you wish. Naturally, you become lighter. The sense of depending on the clouds is gone. At this point, you may enter a state of joy. When you enter this state, you may feel extraordinarily vast. Many patients have described this to me. They say, suddenly I felt extremely tall. I was so tall that my head could touch the sky. When you enter this stage, certain abilities may gradually emerge. You may feel that you can see many things. But he does not let you remain there. He guides you into the 3rd stage. And then the 4th stage, where even the Shishin disappears. He guides you to stop thinking and shut down the senses. In this way, he leads you inward step by step. This is what I like about Liu Tianjun's Piaohua Gong. I have always liked it. It simplifies complicated static Qigong and makes it tangible and understandable. So I thought I would first prepare the way for Professor Liu Tianjun, because I am the one introducing him to everyone. I feel that the time has come for all of you. We should now begin Static Qigong. It is time to improve our Qigong ability and deepen our level. Of Qigong attainment. So if everyone has time, I will ask Hongyan to help organize it. And we can take a class with Professor Liu Tianjun. Then you can see how he teaches us. He is very experienced, so I think everyone will enjoy it. Before we finish, some people here may previously not have attended our classes or heard much about Qigong. So when they hear the word Qigong, the first thing they think of may be Qigong deviation, or famous Qigong masters, or masters emitting qi to cure illness, or they may think of parts of Qigong history associated with fraud. So I hope, at least to some extent, that everyone can gain some understanding of the history of Qigong. If we speak of the history of Qigong, for which written records exist, we previously mentioned about 2,700 years. From about 2,700 to 2,500 years ago, over a period of 200 years, the Huangdi Neijing took shape. The Neijing was gradually completed through the work of many people, and took roughly 200 years to reach its developed form. Thus the Neijing emerged. The Neijing repeatedly mentions Daoyin. One of the passages we hear most often is where the Neijing discusses medical methods and divides medical treatment into several categories. For example, acupuncture, herbal medicine, scraping therapy. Moxibustion, and Daoyin Anqiao. I often like to separate Daoyin Anqiao into Daoyin and Anqiao. Daoyin means the art of Daoyin. It is Qigong. Anqiao is the method Dr. Fu taught us, using the fingers to treat illness. Why are these two methods grouped together? Why does the Neijing say that weakness, reversal, cold and heat are treated with Daoyin and Anqiao? Think about weakness syndromes, reversal syndromes, cold syndromes and heat syndromes. In fact, they encompass all kinds of acute and chronic illnesses in Chinese medicine. A reversal syndrome can be an acute condition, right? A weakness syndrome can also represent chronic illness. So weakness, reversal, cold and heat are treated with Daoyin and Anqiao. That is to say, for all kinds of illnesses, the text presents Daoyin and Anqiao as important treatment methods. By the Sui dynasty, Daoyin was divided by some people into major Daoyin and minor Daoyin. Daoyin simply means the art of Daoyin. That is, Qigong. Anqiao means using the hands. On acupuncture points as a treatment method. These two methods are discussed together because they do not rely on any external tools. You do not need another person, you can do them yourself. You practice the Qigong yourself and press the points yourself. Therefore, neither method relies on external instruments. You treat yourself. That is their method. But one works outwardly. In Qigong practice, you first connect with the universe. Anqiao, by contrast, works inwardly, using the movement of qi within the body to achieve a therapeutic purpose. That is the main difference between them. But neither relies on external tools. No herbs, no scraping board, and no moxibustion. This is what we know from the written historical record about Qigong. Now, around 2000. This book was formed about 2,500 years ago. That is when the book was completed. About 2,400 years ago came Zhuangzi and Laozi. Zhuangzi and Laozi again discussed Daoyin and the idea of guarding the origin and embracing the one. Zhuangzi, however, laid foundations for Dynamic Qigong. For example, what did he describe? He spoke of movements such as the bear, bear hanging or movements of the bear's neck, and bird stretching. That is, stretching like a bird extending its wings, and movements of a bear's neck. He spoke more about dynamic practice. He helped lay the foundation for dynamic Daoyin. Laozi, on the other hand, laid foundations for the static side of Daoyin. He emphasized inward guarding and maintaining intention. Both were discussing Daoyin. Then, with the archaeological finds at Mawangdui, we found excavated artifacts that clearly depicted Daoyin exercises on silk. So we can actually see the illustrations, with both pictures and text. These date back more than 2,000 years, but in fact, in the Shiji, Sima Qian's records of the Grand Historian, the earliest Qigong-related account, is associated with the Yellow Emperor more than 5,000 years ago. It says that in the time of the Yellow Emperor there was a text specifically describing a kind of stepping or guided exercise. At that time, the term Daoyin itself was not yet used. But this was in the Yellow Emperor's era. I cannot remember the title of that book right now. What was it called? I think I wrote it down somewhere. Later I will look for where I noted it and tell you. Anyway, this well, the period of the Yellow Emperor would take us back about 5,000 years. So I have always believed that China's history of Qigong is at least 5,000 years old. In other words, if Chinese medicine has a 4,000-year history, Qigong predates Chinese medicine by at least 1,000 years. There is another book, Hubing Yuan Hu Lun, Treatise on the Origins and Manifestations of Various Diseases, ago, and was written in the Sui dynasty. It was written by a Sui dynasty imperial named physician Chao Yuan Fang. He came from a hereditary Chinese medicine tradition. He wrote the Hubing Yuan Hu Lun. As for this book, I would actually recommend that you look it up online. Why was such a book written in the Sui dynasty? It was one of our earliest books to bring together, within Chinese medicine, the causes of disease, illnesses, manifestations and syndromes. In a unified written system, and then discuss treatment. The work contains 50 volumes and 1,739 disease conditions. And syndromes. Chinese medicine places particular emphasis on symptoms and patterns. As for treatment, it contains very little about Chinese herbal medicine and very few herbal formulas. Instead, much of the treatment content concerns Qigong. So in the book, for many illnesses it describes which exercises to use, including breathing and exhalation methods, and physical movements. Unfortunately, the book has no illustrations. It is entirely text, and it is a very thick book. This was in the Sui dynasty. Historically, as we know, we often speak of the Sui and Tang together as the Sui-Tang period, before the Sui and Tang. China went through the period known as the upheaval of the Five Barbarians and the wars of the northern and southern dynasties. That was one of the most brutal and tragic periods in Chinese history. After that upheaval, and after the wars of the northern and southern dynasties ended, the Sui dynasty was established. Although the Sui dynasty lasted only about 37 years, it began a revival of China's culture, technology, water conservancy and agriculture. Whenever China's economy began to prosper, medicine also began to develop. So this became a period when medicine made major advances. But the Sui declined after only about 38 years. During large water control projects, there was corruption, and eventually popular rebellion. Then came the Tang dynasty. We know the Great Tang period lasted for nearly 300 years. And together the Sui and Tang covered roughly 400 years. Several centuries in all. This Sui-Tang era was a time when China's culture and economy were highly developed. And medicine also developed greatly. So during the Sui-Tang period, in the 6th year of the Sui dynasty, the Hubing Yuan Hu Lun was completed. Then, by the Song dynasty, after the Tang had ended, in the Song dynasty, the work underwent its first major revision and re-editing, because the ancients wrote in classical medical Chinese. People began compiling, annotating and reinterpreting it. During this process, some parts of the book were lost, and some errors also entered later interpretations. So, from the Qing dynasty all the way to modern times, if you look at what is available online, you will find countless people interpreting the Hubing Yuan Hu Lun. Everyone wants to produce their own edition. But for us, what is important? What matters is understanding the history. Qigong is not simply about so-called great Qigong masters emitting qi, nor is it simply Falun Gong and Falun Gong's claims about placing a Falun in someone's abdomen are not what I mean. We need to understand this. If someone studies Chinese medicine but does not understand Qigong, they will never fully get to the bottom of Chinese medicine. Once you understand Qigong, you can understand Chinese medicine more deeply. So Chinese medical Qigong is a very important part of Chinese medicine. I hope everyone will take it seriously. When you read this book, do not say, I want to learn all the exercises in it. After all, it comes from about 1,500 years ago. As I said, the diseases are different, and our living environment is different. We no longer live in thatched huts or beside open ditches. Our living environment today, our dietary conditions, the composition of our food, the state of pollution, our mental and emotional conditions, and the pressures of life have all changed completely. So we cannot simply copy the exercises in this ancient book and breathe exactly as it says to breathe. Nor can we assume that if it says a method treats a certain illness, that is not what I am trying to promote or recommend to everyone. That is not what I mean. However, we need to understand the history. This is one of the most complete historical books on medical Qigong. Unfortunately, much has been lost, and its translations are not always accurate, and some of its methods are now outdated. But historically, this was our first major work. Covering diseases, causes, patterns, and treatment, with a major emphasis on Qigong therapy. Liu Tianjun also tried to restore some of the practices in it. He tried to make videos of them, but it really did not work. And eventually he could not continue. So he stopped. Because he said, for example, you sit upright and take a deep breath. But as he continued, he found it was being interpreted like gymnastics. Therefore, but as for this book, it is very meaningful for understanding the history of Qigong. All right. To think that is all I wanted to say. We originally started at 8:30, right? One and a half. It has been an hour and a half. That is fine. Thank you, thank you. I still owe everyone some answers. I looked through everyone's questions and already answered one or two. There are no particularly important questions. Some people are simply curious about how to hear messages from heaven for themselves. If you ask me, I used to be lazy because I encountered so many Qigong masters in daily life. Some Qigong masters really do have a very good ability to receive messages from heaven, so sometimes I took the easy way. If I wanted to ask something, I would let them ask for me. I have told you before, at a crucial moment in my life, when I truly wanted heaven to give me an accurate answer, the answer came back from heaven and told me that heaven is not a fortune teller. In other words, we cannot simply have every little thing, every large and small matter, answered by heaven for us. As if I had an encyclopedia that could answer everything at a glance. From then on, I began practicing myself and listening for messages from heaven myself. It is not as difficult as you may imagine. So if you ask me today why I can perceive names or read the hands, that is how it came about. It was given by heaven. Because Li Junfeng always says to me, "Why did heaven let you read palms? Why doesn't heaven let me?" I say, "You are not a Chinese medicine practitioner. Even if you could read palms, you might not understand them. Everyone has their own task." Saif hour. Task is to save people as we are called to do. We must not fail the task heaven has given us. So if you want to go deeper, practice Static Qigong. But do not ask me how many times a day, or how long each session should be. Practice until you develop your own experience and reach this Gong Jing, and you will naturally enter it. Only after entering can you know. You've joy you feel when you come out. Because only after entering and then coming out can you know that you entered. Because before entering you can never know what it feels like. Only afterward do you realize that you really entered. That is the only way I can answer. There is no other way. This experience truly cannot be described in words. I wish everyone success. We will not say much more today. Let Hongyan see. And when we have time, we can practice together. Half an hour is enough. Then we can answer questions. An hour is enough. Okay, it depends. Then, if that is if we use a Sunday. That is fine, I know. Anything is possible. I have plenty of time now. I only have time now. I have lots of free time. I have put aside all my work. So originally I planned, in September, to spend some time in the mountains. But I will also have a computer there. And I will bring it with me. All right. Okay. All right, that is great. Does anyone have any questions? About Static Qigong? Yes, there are questions. Please ask your questions. Yes, go ahead. I would like to ask. Teacher Li. About sitting meditation. Is there no intention in sitting meditation? Does sitting meditation mean having no intention? But in ordinary Qigong practice. Perhaps in Buddhist practice. People often say to focus the mind on the Danshin. So should we maintain intention or not? Is it better to settle down without intention? When you tell someone to sit, sitting meditation is Static Qigong, right? Whether you call it sitting meditation, it is essentially Static Qigong. But within Static Qigong, some methods use intention, and some do not. The purpose of using intention is ultimately to reach a state without intention. Because as long as you use intention, You are still doing something. But what we seek is wui. Nothing remains. Nothing exists. So using intention is only the earliest stage of static Qigong. When practicing a method, there are hundreds or thousands of static Qigong methods. Look at the Buddhist, Chan and esoteric practices. So within static Qigong methods, when intention is used, its purpose is also to guide. The mind guides. Where the mind goes, Qi follows. Thus intention guides Qi and directs its movement. Yes, we use intention to make Qi move. Whenever intention directs Qi to move, it is generally a Taoist static Qigong method. As for Buddhist methods, some also use intention. When you practice Piaohua Gong with Liu Tianjun, in the first and second stages, intention is used in both. However, the purpose of the intention matters. And what kind of intention is used? That depends on which method you are learning. Therefore, each method uses intention for a particular purpose. For example, when practicing Shang Gong or another dynamic Qigong method, we can also add intention. For a patient with high blood pressure, I may ask them to place their attention on the soles of the feet and guide Qi downward. But for a patient with low blood pressure, if their face becomes pale and they develop cold sweat, I ask the patient to place the intention at Bai Hui and guide Qi upward. If the patient has stomach pain, I ask them to place their attention on Hongwan. Right, this can strengthen the action of Qi at Hongwan. Where the mind goes, Qi follows. So intention in static Qigong is a common method of practice, but not the only one. It mainly depends on what you are practicing, which method you are practicing, and what its purpose is. But ideally, it is wui, complete emptiness. At the highest level, once you enter that Gong Jing, you have entered wui. You can then do everything without deliberate action, right? When you enter that state of wui, that is our ultimate goal. I want to achieve wui while accomplishing everything. That is the purpose. When you reach that point, nothing remains. Only the Yuan Shen remains. The Yuan Shen existed before we came into this world. the spiritual essence before birth. The Yuan Shen has no physical body. Nor does it have Shi Shen. There is no thinking, no sensory perception. So think about it. The Yuan Shen has no emotions. It does not laugh, or become happy, or sad. The original Yuan Shen is one with heaven. So when only the Yuan Shen remains, you are in the state of oneness of heaven and humanity. You return to the pre-heavenly state. At that point, what intention could you have? What would you focus on? There is no intention. You no longer have ordinary breathing. No sensory perception. No physical body. And no emotional activity. Everything is gone. Entering that state is our ultimate purpose. Teacher Li, may I ask? When you practice during Static Qigong, can you enter the state every time? Not necessarily. Sometimes the state is brief. And sometimes it lasts a long time. Sometimes even a small disturbance can interrupt you. That is what practice is about. That is why I told Liu Tianjun. I told Liu Tianjun that many people want to learn Static Qigong. And Liu Tianjun said, then they have to practice. Yes, for him. The hope is that people do not merely study it, but actually practice. Sometimes even if you practice for a long time. Some people may practice for 10 years and still not enter, while others. It is not simply like that. Just keep practicing. If your Shi Shen interferes, it becomes difficult to enter. That is why many people are disturbed during Static Qigong. Not because they have failed to relax, but because their Shen is too disturbed. There are too many thoughts in the mind. As long as you are thinking. For example, while sitting in stillness, suddenly a very bright red light may appear before you. Extremely intense. You immediately open your eyes. And there is nothing there. But when you close your eyes again, the light returns. You are astonished. First you are startled. Then you feel joy. That is the mistake. Then you cannot enter. You begin to feel joy because of it. Joy itself is attachment. It becomes a pursuit. It becomes desire. Happiness and sadness are both desire. Both are emotional states. So you are immediately disturbed. So you cannot stop thinking. Or shut down the senses. And you return to ordinary awareness. So should we use music, Teacher Li? That makes it even more difficult. Music is something you hear. If you have no senses. Senses. Exactly, you no longer have ordinary senses. What music could you hear? Teacher, entering that state is actually something natural, not controlled by you. Yes, it is not something you operate deliberately. You simply enter. That is why 3 regulations in one cannot really be explained. Yai, how did I enter? As I said, you never know exactly how you go from wakefulness into sleep. But after waking, you know that you slept. You know you fell asleep. And you also know whether you slept well, right? So, yes, I understand. Only afterward can you know that you entered. Teacher Li, may I ask? You said Static Qigong and the very popular called meditation. They are the same and still meditation. Yes, it is a general term. In Europe and the West, it is generally called meditation. And in German it is also called meditation. It is the same basic idea. But Static Qigong contains many different methods. The one I am introducing is one of the simplest methods. Piaohua Gong. And what about the practice you mentioned? Sitting meditation. Sitting meditation, which they call meditation, is essentially the same. Yes, the same. Meditation often uses visualization. Right, it uses visualization. You can imagine. You can imagine yourself under warm sunlight. You can do that, right? You can meditate, imagining yourself in a beautiful environment. But the purpose may be different. Teacher Li, may I ask? When sitting in meditation, which posture is best? Should we use a cross-legged posture, such as the loose cross-legged position? Or is ordinary sitting better, or standing? Which is preferable? Let me put it this way. Cross-legged sitting is best. Because when sitting cross-legged, it conserves qi and blood in the lower limbs and reduces the amount required there. When you stand, qi and blood naturally move downward. If you sit on a chair with the legs hanging down at 90 degrees, qi and blood also move downward. But when you sit cross-legged, qi and blood tend to move upward. The state of meditation is one of extremely high alertness. This extremely clear state is what I mean when I say this extremely high state of clarity means. In other words, you remain completely awake. Not half dazed or half asleep. If you want to reach this state, and allow qi and blood to remain upward. Cross-legged sitting works best. The second method is kneeling sitting. Some people prefer kneeling because they feel more stable. It is also effective. If many patients say they cannot sit this way, especially Europeans, particularly those with heavier body weight, then have them keep the upper and lower legs at a 90-degree angle. Have them sit that way, but do not let the legs hang unsupported, because dangling the legs is the worst. However, the knees should be bent at 90 degrees. This is a good method. As for the hands, you can choose your own position. For example, place the hands together over the dantian. For example, or gently bring the thumbs and index fingers toward each other, and place the palms downward on the thighs. Or you can use the hand posture from Huangdi and Yiki, with both hands forming an open space between them, and place them in front of the dantian. But avoid keeping both palms facing upward. Some people like to do this, but I prefer everyone not to do it. Because this is appropriate when a Qigong master is emitting qi, and you are receiving the qi. Then you can use this posture. For ordinary practice, palms facing downward are better. Okay. But cross-legged sitting can be tiring. When you first sit that way, you may not be able to do full or loose lotus. At first, you are simply not used to it. When I first started sitting cross-legged, I also felt that after a while, my legs became numb and tired. But once you get used to it, there is no problem at all. I am almost 80 years old, and I can sit cross-legged for several hours without a problem. You, teacher, you use the full lotus. Yes, because the full lotus is the most comfortable. It takes some practice. Teacher Li, what you just mentioned, the true sleep state, is that what they call deep sleep? Because when it is monitored, the device shows a period of deep sleep. Yes. Deep sleep. It is monitored using an EEG. Oh. Sometimes deep sleep can last for an hour, and a person may have 65 minutes of deep sleep in one night. From what I have seen, there are several stages. It is divided into several stages. I do not know whether what you mean is the same true sleep state I am talking about. I was looking at what neurology researchers around the world have been studying together as the state of true sleep. They have collectively called it true sleep. But according to their findings, their research results show that no one has been able to remain in it for more than 3 to 5 minutes. Another thing is that I have looked at many of the EEG recordings that patients have sent to me. Their EEG recordings show their deep sleep state. Generally, it is longer before 1 o'clock. Before 2 o'clock, as we would say now. The deep sleep period is relatively long. After 2 o'clock, some people no longer have it. For most people, it lasts about 30 to 40 minutes. So I don't know whether what you are describing is the same deep sleep state I am talking about. It may be different. What I want everyone to understand now is this. If we can achieve a high-quality state of entering stillness, then, if you enter this state for 10 minutes, or 15 minutes, it may be enough to replace 2 or 3 hours of sleep. That's one way of putting it. Your vitality can recover extremely well, because in ordinary sleep, the truly restorative period of the highest quality is actually very short. So if we can extend the period of the highest quality sleep, that is the benefit of our practice. Therefore, if we can enter this state of entering stillness, and truly enter it, the longer we can remain there, the better. So some people ask whether Static Qigong should preferably be practiced at night. It doesn't really matter. If the environment is good, you can practice during the day as well. As long as you can enter that state, it is fine. Translation pending. Sometimes you don't even realize that you have entered it. Only after you return do you realize that you were in it. Then you look at the clock, and an hour has passed. At that point, you should be very happy, right? If you entered and then came out, and find that only 3 or 5 minutes have passed, the effect will be somewhat less. I understand. Teacher Li, there is a question in the dialogue box. Our senior sister Suhua asks about a place in Iceland where you mentioned practicing Qigong last time. She would like to know where it is. I never said that Iceland is a good place for Qigong practice. What I said was that if you go to Iceland, you will discover that the people there believe in all kinds of things. If you ask them what their religious beliefs are, they may say, "We believe in everything." They really do seem to believe in all kinds of things. So, because of the cold climate, There are very few trees. There are mostly bare mountains, with hardly any trees. The climate is simply too cold. So on the mountains, you can see red houses and green houses. They are all small wooden houses. And people will tell you that the red ones are for spirits. The green ones are for gods. And if you ask who another one is for, they will tell you it is for the spirits that are worshipped there. Because of their respect for heaven. And this reverence. Every winter. At the end of the year. When one year changes into the next. They go to the rift area to sit in stillness. They sit in stillness with the purpose of listening for messages from heaven. Why do they choose this particular time? Perhaps some people have heard something at that time. I don't know. I have never practiced sitting in stillness there myself. I am simply telling everyone that this is part of Icelandic culture, custom, and belief. As for that place, Iceland really does have a geological rift. The rift lies between the European and North American tectonic plates. This rift continues to open every year by several centimeters. So today, the rift has formed a small path. It is also a place that almost everyone who travels to Iceland wants to visit. So it is that rift zone. People there like to sit in stillness there during the winter. I am not saying that I recommend that you must go there to meditate. I still say the same thing. Heaven is within our hearts. There is no need to go looking for it. It is not in a temple, nor is it in a church. The divine is within our hearts. Close your eyes. And it is there although you cannot see it. You cannot hear it. That is your own matter. If you communicate with it, one day, when you know that it is right beside you, the joy and happiness are beyond words. You will no longer feel lonely. So I often say, we are born into this world alone. And then we have a family. We have children. But they never truly belong to us. One day, they will leave us. Children grow up. A husband may divorce you. And a husband may also leave you. But who will always remain with you? Heaven. So you will always know that you are not alone. Heaven is there. As long as heaven is there, you have everything you need. But if one day a man tells you, I love you too, then consider yourself lucky. It's like winning the lottery. And if one day that man says, "I don't love you anymore," what have you really lost? Heaven is still there. You are still here. Yes. As long as you hold on to yourself and hold on to heaven, that is enough. Hold on to that connection with heaven. Then you will have a deep sense of inner security. Look at me, I am almost 80 years old now. When my daughter leaves, everything becomes quiet. But I do not feel lonely at all. Because once you know that you are not the only one beside yourself, I hope everyone can enter that state. It allows you to practice without making things complicated. It really is not that complicated. This is why I want you to learn Professor Liu Tianjun's method. He guides you into it step by step. Rather than having you close your eyes like a blind person riding a blind horse, with no idea where you are going, he will guide you into the state. That is why I like this method.